Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie, The Mask in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called The Mask. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you. I'm also going to give you all the information on which OTT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about theory story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the ends. So let's start the video. The Mask is a 1994 American superhero comedy film directed by Chuck Russell and produced by Bob Engelman from a screenplay by Mike Werb and a story by Michael Fallon and Mark Verheiden. It is the first film in the Mask franchise, based on the comic book series of the same name by Mike Richardson, published by Dark Horse Comics. It stars Jim Carrey in the title role, along with Peter Riegert, Peter Greene, Amy Yasbeck, Richard Jenny, and Cameron Diaz in her film debut. Carrey plays Stanley Ipkiss, an ordinary man who finds a magical wooden mask that transforms him into the titular green-faced troublemaker who can cartoonishly alter himself and his surroundings at will. Filming began on August 30th, 1993, and concluded in October 1993. The film was released on July 29th, 1994, by New Line Cinema, becoming a critical and commercial success. The film grossed over $351 million on an $18.23 million budget, becoming the fourth highest-grossing film of 1994, which made it the most profitable film based on a comic up to that point. The film also influenced the resurgence of swing music in the 1990s. It cemented Carrey's reputation as a significant actor of the 1990s, and it established Diaz as a leading lady. Carrey was nominated for a Golden Globe for his role, and the film was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, losing to Forrest Gump. A standalone sequel without the involvement of Carrey, Son of the Mask, was released in 2005 to critical and commercial failure. Plot: in Edge City, insecure bank teller Stanley Ipkiss is frequently ridiculed by everyone except for his co-worker and best friend Charlie Shoemaker. Meanwhile, gangster Dorian Tyrell, whose boss Nico owns the Coco Bongo nightclub, plots to overthrow Nico. One day, Tyrell sends his dazzling singer girlfriend, Tina Carlisle, into the bank to record its layout for an upcoming robbery. Stanley is attracted to Tina, and she seemingly reciprocates. After being denied entrance to the Coco Bongo to watch Tina perform, Stanley's faulty loaner car breaks down during his drive home. While looking over the harbor bridge in despair, he tries rescuing a humanoid figure in the waters, but finds it to be a pile of garbage concealing a wooden mask. Upon returning to his apartment and donning the mask, he is transformed into a green-faced and zoot-suited trickster known as the Mask, who can cartoonishly alter himself and his surroundings at will. With newfound confidence, Stanley indulges in a comical rampage through the city, humiliating several of his tormentors, including his temperamental landlady, Agnes Peenman, and the mechanics who gave him the faulty car. The following day, Stanley encounters Detective Lieutenant Mitch Kellaway and newspaper reporter Peggy Brandt, investigating the Mask's activity. To obtain the funds necessary to attend Tina's performance, Stanley dons the mask and raids the bank, inadvertently foiling Tyrell's robbery. At the Coco Bongo, Stanley dances exuberantly with Tina, whom he kisses. Shortly after, Tyrell confronts him for disrupting the theft, and Stanley flees, leaving behind a scrap of cloth from his suit, which reverts into a piece of his pajamas. After arresting Tyrell and his henchmen, Kellaway finds the piece of fabric and suspects Stanley's involvement. Later, Stanley consults psychiatrist Arthur Newman, who recently published a book on masks, deduces that the mask may be a creation of Loki and its powers are only active at night. Newman believes it is mythology, but he concludes that the mask's personality is based on Stanley's repressed desires. That night, Stanley meets Tina at a local park as the Mask until they are interrupted by Kellaway, who attempts to capture him. Stanley flees with Peggy after he distracts the police with a mass performance of the titular song from Cuban Pete. She then reluctantly betrays him to Tyrell for a $50,000 bounty. After Tyrell becomes a bulky and malevolent being when he dons the mask, he has his henchmen force Stanley to reveal the location of the stolen money before turning him in to the police, along with a green rubber mask to implicate Stanley. When Tina visits Stanley at the station, he urges her to leave the city, but not before she thanks Stanley for showing her kindness and telling him that the mask was unnecessary. She attempts to flee, but is kidnapped by Tyrell, who prepares her for the charity ball at the Coco Bongo, hosted by Nico and attended by the city's elite, including the mayor. Upon arrival, the masked Tyrell murders Nico and prepares to destroy the club with a time bomb. Stanley's dog, Milo, helps his owner escape from his cell by retrieving the keys from the guard. Stanley sets out to stop Tyrell and takes Kellaway hostage to escape the police station. After locking Kellaway in his car, Stanley enters the club and enlists Charlie's help, but he is quickly discovered and captured. Tina tricks Tyrell into removing the mask, which is recovered and donned by Milo, who battles through Tyrell's henchmen as Stanley and Tyrell fight each other. Stanley retrieves the mask, uses its powers to dispose of the bomb seconds before it detonates, and then sends Tyrell down the drain of the club's ornamental fountain. The police arrive and arrest Tyrell's henchmen. Kellaway tries arresting Stanley again, but the mayor intervenes, implicating Tyrell as the mask and praising Stanley as a hero. The following day, Stanley, exonerated and more secure, returns to the harbor bridge with Tina. Tina throws the mask into the water before she and Stanley kiss. Charlie tries to retrieve the mask, only for Milo to retrieve the mask and swim away. Cast: Jim Carrey as Stanley Ipkiss, the Mask, a down-on-his-luck bank employee who is mistreated and taken advantage of by people. Carrey commented that he characterized Stanley after his own father, a nice guy, just trying to get by. When he wears the mask of Loki, Stanley becomes a green-faced and zoot-suited trickster known as the Mask, who can animate and alter himself and his surroundings at will. Cameron Diaz as Tina Carlisle, Tyrell's glamorous and beautiful girlfriend, who becomes attracted to Stanley. Tina is dissatisfied with Tyrell as a partner, but does not defy him until Stanley has courted her. Susan Boyd provides Tina's uncredited singing voice. Peter Riegert as Lieutenant Mitch Kellaway, a slightly cynical police detective lieutenant who pursues the Mask, Tyrell, and Stanley throughout the film. Peter Greene as Dorian Tyrell, a rogue mafia officer who desires to overthrow his superior, Nico. When wearing the mask, Tyrell becomes a bulky and malevolent being who speaks in a deep, demonic voice. Garrett T. Sato and Jeep Swenson also portray the masked Tyrell. Amy Yasbeck as Peggy Brandt, a reporter looking for a scoop to get her out of the advice column. Richard Jenny as Charles Charlie Schumacher, Stanley's best friend. Charlie is amiable, but can be selfish or irrational at times. Orestes Matessina as Nico, Tyrell's superior and the owner of the Coco Bongo. Jim Doan as Detective Doyle, Kellaway's amiable but slightly inept partner. Jeremy Roberts as Bobby, one of Tyrell's henchmen employed as the bouncer at the Coco Bongo and a friend of Charlie. Ben Stein as Dr. Arthur Newman, a psychiatrist who tells Stanley about the mask's origins. He is also the author of the book The Masks We Wear, which deals with people portraying themselves differently on the outside to be accepted by others. Ivory Ocean as Mitchell Tilton, the mayor of Edge City. Reg E. Cathy as Freeze, one of Tyrell's henchmen and a loyal friend of his. Dennis Forrest as Sweet Eddie, one of Tyrell's henchmen. Emin Roche as Mr. Dickey, Stanley and Charlie's supervisor at Edge City Bank. Tim Bagley and Johnny Williams as Irv and Bert Ripley, the car mechanics who overcharged Stanley and gave him a faulty loaner car. Nancy Fish as Agnes Peenman, Stanley's temperamental landlady. Nils Allen Stewart as Orlando, one of Tyrell's henchmen. Blake Clark as Murray, Peggy's supervisor at the city's local newspaper. Jolie Fisher as Maggie, a client who comes to buy concert tickets and blows Stanley off for her friend. She appears only in the beginning of the film. Christopher Darga as a paramedic. Richard Montez, Daniel James Peterson, and Kevin Grevio as some of Tyrell's lesser henchmen. Scott McElroy and Howard Kay as Nico's bodyguards. Max as Milo, Stanley's Jack Russell Terrier. When wearing the mask, Milo becomes quite aggressive and mischievous, but is still friendly and loyal to his owner. Production, development. In 1989, Mike Richardson and Todd Moyer, respectively the founder and executive vice president of Dark Horse Comics, first approached New Line Cinema about adapting the comic The Mask into a film, after having seen offers from other studios. The main character went through several transformations in different script treatments, and the project was stalled a couple of times. One unused mask idea, according to Richardson, was to transform the story into one about a mask maker who took faces off of corpses to put them on teens and turn them into zombies. Initially intended to become a new horror franchise, New Line Cinema offered the job of directing the film to Chuck Russell, who had previously worked on the A Nightmare on Elm Street franchise and the 1988 remake of The Blob. Russell found the excessive violence of the comic off-putting and decided that it wouldn't work in a film. Instead, he proposed a more comical, family-friendly tone. Writing. Mike Werb says Chuck Russell tapped him after reading his script for Curious George for Imagine. The two decided to turn The Mask into a wild romantic comedy. Mike Werb wrote his first draft of The Mask in less than 6 weeks, and less than 2 months later, it was greenlit. According to Mark Verheiden, they had a first draft screenplay for a film version done back in 1990. Verheiden then wrote the second draft in early 1991, adding more humor, and that ended up being the only work he did on The Mask. Verheiden's revised draft included more instances of fourth wall breaking like cameos by critics Siskel and Ebert, and dark content such as excessive bloodshed and sexual assault. The characters Stanley, Kellaway, and Doyle carried into the final film. Stanley's girlfriend Kathleen, inspired by Kathy from the comics, evolved into Tina Carlisle, while Scully and Vitelli became Dorian Tyrell and Nico, respectively. After that, the film entered development hell. The dance sequence at Coco Bongo was inspired by the 1943 animated short Red Hot Riding Hood. Casting. In the early stages, various actors were suggested as possibilities for the lead role. Possible leads included Rick Moranis, Martin Short, and Robin Williams. New Line Cinema executive Mike DeLuca sent a tape of Jim Carrey performing a sketch from the comedy show In Living Color to Richardson, who noted Carrey's energy and highly expressive physicality. Director Chuck Russell had seen Carrey perform live at the Comedy Store and followed him on In Living Color, and was keen to cast him in the film. Carrey was top of his list, and the script had been rewritten for him, but Nicolas Cage and Matthew Broderick were also kept in consideration if he declined. Producer Bob Engelman recalled Carrey had the flu during the filming. Jim did things that, obviously, when he became a superstar, he never would do. I remember one night when he was sick as a dog and he was throwing up and he said, "I can't do this." I said, "Look, Jim, they won't let us shut down. If we don't get this, we don't get this." We dragged him out of the trailer, and he was a trooper and got it in there, delivered, and was fantastic. But those are the sort of things that would not have happened when Jim became the superstar that he became. Russell's first choice to play Tina had been Anna Nicole Smith. However, she backed out at the last minute to appear in Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult instead. A costume director he had worked with recommended Cameron Diaz, and they got her to audition for the part. The character was originally written as a good girl who is actually bad, but after Diaz was cast, the part was rewritten to make her genuinely a good person. Mike Richardson said to Forbes that Diaz proved to be the right choice. If you watch the film again, you'll notice scenes where Jim and Cameron are together. If you watch her face, oftentimes Jim was doing something, and she would break out laughing the minute the scene ended. Visual effects. The Mask's visual effects were handled by Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, and DreamQuest Images. The sequences in the film, which involved computer animation, were supervised by ILM animation director Wes Takahashi. Although many VFX scenes had to be cut for budget, New Line invested more heavily on the special effects, as Jim Carrey was not yet an established star. Russell videotaped the rehearsals, then worked to design the effects out of Carrey's performance. I insisted on working off Jim's face, on making the action organic to Jim's performance. No matter how good the effect is, if it's not coming out of character and story, it's not going to be effective. The guys at ILM said they figured I saved about $1 million once I got Jim, just on what he was able to do versus what we intended to do originally. Makeup effects artist Greg Canham wanted to bring out Carrey's exaggerated facial expressions through makeup. Carrey's daily makeup sessions took 4 hours. The costume included fake teeth meant to be used outside of dialogue scenes, but Carrey learned to wear them while talking to play the character more convincingly. Music, soundtrack, swing music featured prominently in the film, and Royal Crown Revue made an on-screen cameo, which in turn influenced the swing revival later in the decade. The Mask, music from the motion picture, was released on July 26, 1994, on Chaos Records through Sony Music Entertainment. It features music from Escape, Tony, Toney, Vanessa Williams, Harry Connick Jr., Carrey himself, and more. The songs Cuban Pete and Hey Pachuco were also used for the trailer of the 1997 Disney film Flubber. Score. The record labels TriStar Music and Epic Soundtracks released an orchestral score soundtrack to The Mask after the original soundtrack's release. The score was composed and conducted by Randy Edelman, performed by the Irish Film Orchestra, and recorded at Windmill Lane Studios, Ireland. Opening, The Origin of the Mask. Tina, Carnival, Transformation, Tango in the Park, Lovebird, Out of the Line of Fire, A Dark Night, The Man Behind the Mask, Dorian Gets a New Face, Looking for a Way Out, The Search, Forked Tongue, Milo to the Rescue, The Mask is Back, Finale, Reception, Box Office. The film was a box office success, grossing $119 million domestically and over $350 million worldwide, becoming the second highest grossing superhero movie at that time, behind Batman. In terms of global gross compared to budget, the film became the most profitable comic book movie of all time, and remained so until 2019, when Joker surpassed it. The Mask is one of 3 films featuring Carrey, the others being Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and Dumb and Dumber, released in 1994, that helped launch the actor to superstardom. The Mask was the most successful of these 3 films, both critically and commercially. Critical response. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 80% based on reviews from 54 critics, with an average rating of 6.5/10. The site's consensus states, "It misses perhaps as often as it hits, but Jim Carrey's manic bombast, Cameron Diaz's blowsy appeal, and the film's overall cartoony bombast keep The Mask afloat." Metacritic gave it a weighted average score of 56 out of 100 based on reviews from 12 critics. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A+ to F scale. On the television program At the Movies, Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert gave the film 2 thumbs up, citation needed. In his column, Ebert, who was underwhelmed by his performance in Ace Ventura, thought Carrey found a perfect vehicle in The Mask. He also praised the art design and called Diaz a true discovery. Siskel, who had a similar dislike for Ace Ventura, praised Carrey's performance in The Mask by stating that he was better used as an ingredient instead of as the plot. He also commended Diaz's performance, and he overall called the film the latest example of technique overriding the written word in an American film. Accolade. The film was nominated for Best Visual Effects at the 67th Academy Awards. The film was also nominated for Best Fantasy Film, Best Costumes, and Best Makeup at the Saturn Awards. Carrey was nominated for a Golden Globe, but also a Razzie Award for Worst New Star. Year-end lists. Honorable mention, Betsy Pickle, Knoxville News-Sentinel. Honorable mention, Dan Kraft, The Pantograph. Home media. The film was released on VHS and Laserdisc on January 18, 1995, and on DVD on March 26, 1997. The VHS version included the Space Ghost Coast to Coast episode, The Mask, which features interviews with Jim Carrey and Chuck Russell. The DVD presented a non-anamorphic widescreen transfer. It was eventually released as a special edition in 2005 with an anamorphic transfer. It was later released on Blu-ray disc on December 9, 2008. It was the most rented title in the UK for the year 1995 with 3.8 million rentals. Other media. Animated series. Main article, The Mask Animated Series. An animated television series titled The Mask Animated Series made over 54 episodes from 1995 to 1997, with Rob Paulsen as Stanley Ipkiss and his alter ego, The Mask, and Neil Ross as Kellaway. Ben Stein reprised his role as Dr. Newman. Though based on the film and making some minor references to its events, it is set in an alternate continuity where Ipkiss keeps the mask, Tina Carlisle is absent, and the mask works during daytime. Its final episode was a crossover with another Jim Carrey character, Ace Ventura. This would later continue in an episode of the Ace Ventura Pet Detective cartoon series. Video game. A video game based on the movie, also titled The Mask, was released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System by Black Pearl Software. Son of the Mask. Main article, Son of the Mask. After the success of the original, a sequel film was planned, with magazine Nintendo Power offering readers a chance, via sweepstakes, to win a cameo role in the film. Carrey eventually bailed on the project, forcing Nintendo Power to give the winner of the contest the equivalent cash value of the cameo role instead. A standalone sequel, Son of the Mask, featuring neither Carrey nor Diaz, was eventually released in 2005. It was a critical and commercial failure upon release, and the franchise was put on hold indefinitely. Possible third film. On the possibility of a direct sequel to the 1994 film, with Carrey reprising the role of Stanley Ipkiss and Diaz as Tina Carlisle, Mike Richardson said in a 2014 interview, "We've been talking about reviving The Mask, both in film and in comics. We've had a couple of false starts." In December 2024, Carrey revealed that he was still interested in portraying the mask in a sequel as long as the idea is good. The opening shots of The Mask look like they were salvaged from a desperately low-budget 1950s science fiction movie. Marine salvage operations lead to the rupture of ancient chest that has rested for ages on the bottom of the bay, and a curious wooden mask floats to the surface. Not long after, disconsolate bank teller Stanley Ipkiss, a genial nerd played by Jim Carrey, is staring into the dark waters and contemplating suicide. He has just been bounced from a nightclub, the latest in a long series of humiliations, but he has a good heart, and when he sees the mask floating with some rubbish, he thinks it is a drowning victim and jumps in to save it. All he brings to shore is the mask, but when, later that night, transformation scenes are of course the soul of comic book fiction. Billy Batson shouts, "Shazam!" Clark Kent darts into a phone booth, Bruce Wayne becomes Batman, and in every case an insignificant wimp becomes a superhero. No wonder adolescent boys respond to these stories so powerfully. Consider what happens to Stanley when he puts on the mask. He is instantly transformed into a maniacal whirlwind of energy, dressed in a 1940s-style zoot suit, a cross between the Joker and Aladdin's genie with elements of the shadow. The Mask is a perfect vehicle for the talents of Jim Carrey, who underwhelmed me with Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, but here seems to have found a story and character that work together with manic energy. One of the key design decisions on the movie must have involved the Mask character's makeup. It transforms Carrey's features into a much larger, comic bookish parody, but at the same time, the features are still able to move in a lifelike way. The notes with the film explain that makeup expert Greg Canham realized Carrey's exaggerated facial expressions are part of his essence and didn't want them lost behind makeup. The result is a movie character who seems half real, half animated, and the director, Charles Russell, is able to use special effects to move effortlessly between what might be possible and what is certainly not, as the mask whirls like a bebop dervish and triumphantly prevails in situations that would have baffled poor Stanley Ipkiss. The story begins with Stanley as a hapless bank clerk who is hopelessly besotted by a beautiful customer, Tina Carlisle, Cameron Diaz. She flirts with him in the bank while taking secret videotape of the vault for her boss, the slimy Dorian Tyrell, Peter Greene, who runs the Coco Bongo Club, where, of course, Tina is the slinky chanteuse. Symbol, Smo. Read more. Cameron Diaz is a true discovery in the film, a genuine sex bomb with a gorgeous face, a wonderful smile, and a gift of comic timing. This is her first movie role after a brief modeling career. It will not be her last. Her chemistry with the Carrey character holds together a plot that is every bit as derivative as it can be. And when she dances with the mask, the result is one of those scenes when movie magic really works. The story otherwise involves Richard Jenny as Charlie, Stanley's best friend at the bank, who introduces him to the mysteries of the Coco Bongo Club. Peter Riegert as a cop who notices the mask's tie seems to be made of the same material as Stanley's unspeakable pajamas, and Milo, Stanley's dog, who is at least as clever as his master. The art design on the movie goes for the lurid 1940s film noir look of a lot of superhero comic books, and the Coco Bongo Club looks recycled out of Gilda and a dozen other movies with elegant nightclubs. Stanley's apartment resembles a teenage boy's bedroom. All that's missing is a sign on the outside of the door saying, "Keep out! This means you!" The look of the film is as much fun as anything else. The powers of the mask itself are never really explained. The closest the film comes is in a scene with psychiatrist Dr. Arthur Newman, played by Ben Stein. Newman identifies the design as reminiscent of Norse culture and name-drops the god of mischief, Loki. This scene also establishes the mask only seems to work at night. Yet, in a film like this, the science or magic behind these powers doesn't matter. Instead, the movie shows just how horrifying the power to alter reality would be. It also examines how this power isn't necessarily a good thing. The mask still robs a bank in order to fund his night out on the town. 30 years after its initial release, the mask may not fit with modern comedic sensibilities. Some moments are still genuinely funny, such as Stanley trying to get the mask to work in Dr. Newman's office. The dog Milo is one of the best characters in the movie. Yet, given the tenor of comedy in 2024, especially where superpowers are concerned, it's unclear how well the film's aged. With the benefit of nostalgia, the film's humor can still work. But for younger viewers, the word cringe comes to mind. Lack of character depth and the poor treatment of women also date the film. In 1994, Jim Carrey's catchphrase moments were ubiquitous in pop culture. The Mask's familiar lines, "Somebody stop me," and "S smokin'," helped make the actor a comedy icon. Whether the popularity of these moments makes them feel played out now or is another question. It's clear Russell knew what he was doing at the time, as those scenes are almost fourth-wall breaks. Even if they're not as popular after several decades, the film does retain a lot of its original charm because it fully embraces its unabashed silliness. Of course, had The Mask been faithful to the comics, it would have aged even more poorly. The filmmakers could have done a better job developing its villains and giving the women characters any inner life at all. But there remains an innocence to The Mask, especially in the context of the dearth of superpowered fantasy films at that time. Which parts of the film still work for audiences is down expressly to the performances. Yet 30 years later, it still has something to offer. I never thought it could happen. Jim Carrey, star of Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, upstaged, and not once, but twice. While it's true that The Mask is another vehicle for the rubber-featured modern-day amalgamation of Jerry Lewis and the Three Stooges, this time around, Carrey has some competition, and there are a number of scenes where he ends up playing second fiddle. The special effects are, for the most part, rather impressive, but there is frequently guilty of overwhelming the star's performance as complimenting it. Nevertheless, if you think Carrey has an expressive face, wait till you see him with the mask on. Eyes pop out and jaws drop, literally. ILM goes to work with their own version of live-action animation whenever anyone dons the mask. Good costumes and makeup serve only to enhance the computer-generated visuals. And even as the audience's attention is arrested by the work of the effects wizards, there's still room for a canine scene stealer. Milo, whose real name is Max, is the perfect foil for Carrey's goofiness, and, yes, there are occasions where his animal antics divert the spotlight away from his two-legged co-star. Carrey, meanwhile, is playing a split role, mild-mannered Stanley Ipkiss and his superhuman alter ego, The Mask. Stanley is a shy, unassuming man who works in a bank and lives with Milo in a small apartment. One day, following a terrible bout with Murphy's Law, Stanley finds a curious-looking mask floating amidst some debris in a river. Later at home, when he finally gets around to trying the mask on, Stanley learns that this isn't some archaeological curiosity. It has power, the power to transform. From the moment the mask clings to his skin and his face turns green, Stanley's personality undergoes a radical shift. Insecurity is replaced by flamboyance. Physically, there seems to be little that he can't do, from twisting his body into a pretzel to taking a bullet in the chest or forming a Tommy gun out of a balloon. While wearing the mask, Stanley makes a comment about becoming a superhero, but he's really interested in one thing. Tina Carlisle, Cameron Diaz, a voluptuous nightclub singer who works for a local gangster, Peter Greene. Following a bank robbery to finance his wooing, the mask discovers that a cop, Lieutenant Mitch Kellaway, Peter Riegert, is hot on his trail. And it's not that difficult a trail to follow. After all, how many lime-faced bandits are there who move like the Warner Brothers cartoon Tasmanian Devil? Carrey plays Stanley with surprising restraint, giving his zaniness free rein only when the mask is on. In some ways, it's a Clark Kent Superman thing. Stanley and the mask might share the same body, but they're very different. One is a typical nice guy who finishes last. The other is Robin Williams' genie from Aladdin come to life. Carrey provides dozens of whirlwind impersonations. As a comedy, The Mask is genial, but its recycled plot is far too thin for the film to succeed as either an adventure or a spoof. Comic book and cartoon are two terms that come to mind for describing this movie. Neither is intended to be pejorative, but each conjures certain apt images. For me, Ace Ventura was too much concentrated Jim Carrey. In The Mask, the forceful personality is diluted. The star is mostly subdued, except during those off-the-wall bursts of energy that accompany the appearance of the mask. The film is entertaining enough, in a light, undemanding sort of way, but more than the combined efforts of Carrey, ILM, and Max are demanded to camouflage the seams and holes still apparent in this production. Film review, lean, mean, and green, The Mask is unquestionably a money-making movie machine. But there's nothing mechanical or rote about the offbeat romantic adventure. This showcase for the talents of Jim Carrey is adroitly directed, viscerally and visually dynamic, and just plain fun. The box office will be booming just like the title character's heart, and the film should easily emerge as one of the year's biggest commercial successes. The comic book refugee arrives with a nod to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In the fictional burg of Edge City, good-hearted Stanley Ipkiss, Carrey, works doggedly as a loan officer at a major bank. He's a very nice guy, and true to the old saw, has wound up at the appropriate lower rung of the ladder. While his buddy and a couple of babes glide into the exclusive Coco Bongo Club, Stan gets the proverbial heave-ho. Driving back to his dreary apartment, the dejected sap spies what he thinks is a body floating in the river. He dives into the polluted waters, only to discover a carved face mask attached to a mass of flotsam. But when he returns home and tries on the relic, the fit is frightening. Drab, mild-mannered Stanley morphs into a confident whirlwind of color with a grin on his green face, revealing a set of pearly whites that's blinding. In his new guise, the mask, he definitely provides the edge in Edge City. Though there's little doubt where the tale is headed, Mike Werb's script and Charles Russell's direction effectively managed to mask obvious intentions with crisp, witty banter and visual bravura. The usual pitfall of the drab guy providing long, colorless narrative is cleverly sidestepped by means of colorful supporting characters, Carrey's innate charisma, and a truly extraordinary dog named Max, as Stanley's intrepid, industrious, and perplexed pet, Milo. Meanwhile, the dazzling special effects come as close as humanly possible to replicating the mayhem and invention of 40s Warner Bros. Cartoons. The title character literally bounces off walls, and when he spies his dream girl, his jaw puts a dent in the floorboards. Because Stanley is such a nice, albeit uptight guy, he can only daydream about knockout Tina Carlisle, Cameron Diaz. The Mask is another matter. Nothing is going to stop him from romancing her and dancing up a storm in one of the film's inventive bits of pyrotechnic choreography. The glitch is that Tina is the mole of gangster Dorian Tyrell, Peter Greene. So, somewhat inadvertently, the green-complected mask winds up putting a monkey wrench in Tyrell's power-hungry plans. In addition, Lieutenant Kellaway, Peter Riegert of the ECPD, is in pursuit, convinced the mask is the criminal mastermind behind the city's current spate of lawlessness. It's inconceivable to imagine anyone but the dexterous Carrey as the mask, and the film sports a uniformly strong support cast with very good villains, including Greene and Orestes Matessina, and a droll good cop turn from Riegert. Diaz is a real find as the femme fatale who's just looking for the decent thing to do. Applying a deft touch, Russell, hitherto a genre director, maintains a cartoon style to the violence that's quite suitable for all audiences. At the same time, Pick has a hip sensibility that will attract young adults as well as older ones for a late summer BO deluge. It may only be coincidence that the green-skinned character sports a yellow-gold suit and fedora. In the Commercial Academy, the mask's colors are definitely green and gold. This is a digitized version of an article from the Times' print archive before the start of online publication in 1996. To preserve these articles as they originally appeared, the Times does not alter, edit, or update them. Occasionally, the digitization process introduces transcription errors or other problems. We are continuing to work to improve these archived versions. For a movie industry enamored of cartoon heroes, Jim Carrey ought to be a dream come true. With his sparkling silly grin and his true talent for physical clowning, Mr. Carrey comes as close to being an animated creature as a live actor ever could. Add to that a goofy, ingenuous screen persona with obvious appeal for children, and you have the not-so-surprising popularity of Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, the lowball hit of the winter season. Now, primed for broader success in vehicles better tailored to his talents, Mr. Carrey returns in The Mask, an astonishingly lazy and perfunctory effort that does little to realize his comic potential. Listless as it is, The Mask succeeds in illustrating two of the more troubling cinematic trends of the moment. First of all, this is another film in which a seemingly mild-mannered, powerless man, Jack Nicholson in Wolf, Arnold Schwarzenegger in True Lies, even Tom Hanks in Forrest Gump, releases his secret reserves of viciousness or ambition. Exempt Mr. Hanks from that thought if you really believe it's possible to drift like a feather into wealth and fame. The idea turns particularly sour in The Mask, a revenge fantasy in which meek Stanley Ipkiss, Mr. Carrey, develops the power to play nasty tricks on anyone who's done him wrong. Second, The Mask underscores the shrinking importance of conventional storytelling in special effects-minded movies, which are happy to overshadow quaint ideas about plot and character with flashy, up-to-the-minute gimmickry. Far more energy has gone into stretching Mr. Carrey's face, twirling his legs, and conceiving animation-style gags for him to exploit than into creating a single interesting character or memorable line. Even more egregiously than most of this summer's blockbusters, The Mask tells a story that wouldn't be worth telling without tricks. But if you build a film this way, as Hollywood continues to discover, audiences, will come. Viewers even turned out for a film as feeble as The Flintstones, which transformed live actors into cartoonish characters, not because the notion was clever, but simply because it could be executed at all. So it's been a murderous summer at the multiplex, with high-tech hits hugely dominant and quieter films crowded out faster than you can say Wyatt Earp. The Mask exudes the confidence of a film sure to fall into the more fortunate category, if only because Mr. Carrey's antics have novelty value. They needn't be clever to be an automatic draw. Actually, Mr. Carrey works very hard here, as do the ingenious special effects pioneers at Industrial Light and Magic, who exaggerate the star's manic gestures until they take on frenetic intensity. But these pyrotechnics, costly and elaborate as they are, take up only a small proportion of screen time. The rest of The Mask plods though a drab, time-killing story featuring the sad sack Ipkiss, a stock hoodlum named Dorian Tyrell, Peter Greene, and a policeman named Kellaway, Peter Riegert, the only actor besides Mr. Carrey to show any signs of life here. Scaring away the Carrey-loving kiddie audience is Tina Carlisle, Cameron Diaz, a gorgeous, dopey bimbo who's enough to make Anna Nicole Smith look like a feminist college professor. The early part of the film follows Ipkiss, a milquetoast bank clerk, through a series of petty humiliations. Showing up at a fancy nightclub in a beat-up car is supposed to be a particularly wounding experience. He also meets and ogles Tina, who is actually in cahoots with a gang of hoods, none of which matters in the slightest. The only event worth noticing is Ipkiss's accidental discovery of the title object, which, like a lot of things in The Mask, looks like nothing special. He puts it on, becomes a demonic nut, and goes wild. Soon, with a green face and a sneer as wicked as the Joker's, Ipkiss can indulge in malicious mischief of the no-fault kind. As in the Chuck Jones and Tex Avery cartoons that provide obvious visual inspiration, Ipkiss can tease, torment, clobber, and humiliate others without consequence. He wakes up innocent and maskless on the mornings after. He himself can even fall out a window and go splat, rising up to yell, "Look, Ma, I'm roadkill. Ha ha ha." This is a far cry from the sweeter, more personable humor of Mr. Carrey's Ace Ventura days. Temporarily diverting are a couple of musical interludes, in one of which the Mask, as Ipkiss's alter ego is called, is surrounded by police officers and coaxes them into dancing the rumba. Another, in a nightclub, finds the Mask's tongue, eyeballs, and heart all popping out at the arousing sight of Tina, which certainly strains the limits of animation-inspired metaphor. Mr. Carrey is funniest doing quick, movie-based impressions, like a Dirty Harry turn that lets him flash colossal guns. The film's single best stunt has Milo, Max, Ipkiss's small dog, slipping into the mask and turning into as wild a lunatic as his master. As directed by Charles Russell, whose work on Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and a Blob remake has done little to prepare him for this ambitious venture, The Mask goes absolutely dead when not following its hero's insane outbursts. And since Mr. Carrey remains an actor who can even shut a drawer with comic panache, that kind of dreariness is all the more wasteful. Bright-eyed, crazily intense, irrepressibly silly, Mr. Carrey can be funny without fireworks. He deserves material clever enough to let him do just that. Though I'm on the record as not caring in the least for Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, I had a great time at The Mask. And there seems little doubt that Jim Carrey has another movie vehicle primed to shoot his star even higher into the Hollywood stratosphere. The Mask is a wacky and eye-popping, literally, combination of live-action comedy and computer animation, the latter perfectly complementing Carrey's rubbery comic persona. In fact, it's fair to say that anyone else would have had trouble pulling off a movie like this, but it seems perfectly suited to Carrey's wild and weird talents. Unfortunately, the story is strictly routine superhero stuff. Carrey stars as Stanley Ipkiss, a mild-mannered bank officer in Edge City, which, like Batman's Gotham City, is this picture's version of Manhattan, where he allows himself to be browbeaten by everyone from his boss to his landlady to the garage mechanics repairing his car. One night, Stanley comes across a mound of garbage floating in the river, which he mistakes for a body. Inside this unpleasant heap is a wooden mask that has been unleashed from a buried treasure box. And when Stanley puts on the mask, it transforms him into a bizarre creature with a green face, a yellow zoot suit, and an attitude. Actually, he's a cartoon character, part Tasmanian Devil, part Bugs Bunny, and all Tex Avery, the artist who helped conceive the catalog of Warner Bros. Cartoon characters. While the film's highlights are far and away the amazing technical effects, which allow Stanley's alter ego, the Mask, to perform all sorts of physics-defying feats, Carrey offers some hilarity of his own. On the dance floor, while singing Cuban Pete, he dances wildly. When confronting criminals, he turns balloon animals into automatic weapons. Instead of running, he literally bounces off the walls. And when he sees a beautiful woman singing in a nightclub, his jaw drops about a foot, his tongue unrolls across the table, his eyes bug out about 6 inches. Well, you get the idea. The effects are startling and hilarious and come directly from those old Warner Bros. Cartoons. But it is Carrey's performance that makes them acceptable and appealing. Unfortunately, the story has a hard time keeping up, and the film lags a bit between the wild mask set pieces. At one point, the mask is explained as Scandinavian, representing Loki, the Norse god of mischief. Supposedly, it brings out repressed feelings, and since Stanley is a nice guy, the mask is mischievous but never malicious. Except when he robs a bank, a plot point that is never dealt with, but which seems anachronistic, Carrey gets good support from Peter Riegert as a straight-faced police detective, as well as Amy Yasbeck and Cameron Diaz as the women he gets mixed up with. And best of all, the very funny dog, Milo. But this is Carrey's show, and he is hilarious, whether being animated into doing the impossible or just reeling off a string of impressions to get the better of the bad guys. Despite some flaws and the somewhat saggy final third, fans of the Fantastic will have a great time, and Carrey may bring some new fans into his already enormous flock. The Mask is rated PG-13 for violence, a few scattered profanities, and some vulgar gags. A meek, gullible bank employee named Stanley Ipkiss, Jim Carrey, is about to get jolted from his mundane existence. A beautiful chanteuse named Tina Carlisle, Cameron Diaz, comes into Stanley's branch and asks him to open an account for her. Little does Stanley know that Tina is casing the bank, so her boyfriend, Dorian, Peter Greene, can rob it. Before Dorian and his mobster friends can rob the bank, Stanley finds a mask, and when he puts it on, all his inhibitions disappear, and he goes to see Tina perform. In order to get into the club, Stanley robs the bank Dorian was planning to rob. Now, not only are mobsters after Stanley, so are the police in the form of Lieutenant Mitch Kellaway. Will the mask save Stanley from the police and the mob? This movie fails for many reasons. The Mask was supposed to be Carrey's breakout film, and it was a box office smash for sure, but Jim Carrey did a lot of the same mugging that he did on In Living Color and the Pet Detective movies, except he had a more cartoonish medium in which to do his mugging. The characters are pretty unappealing, with moral compasses that are broken or at least not working well. And the romantic comedy aspect of the film is not believable, because there's no reason why Tina would fall for a simpleton like Stanley. There are reasons to watch this film. The special effects are a tribute to Tex Avery and Chuck Jones. The Mask character is a combination of the frenetic energy of the Tasmanian Devil from Warner Brothers and the googly-eyed objectifying wolf from MGM Animation. Even Stanley's dog becomes a tribute to Hanna-Barbera's Muttley. There is also an interesting revelation about the spirit that possesses the Mask, which would probably result in an interstudio lawsuit if The Mask were made today. This is also Cameron Diaz's first movie, and she didn't hesitate to take the spotlight away from Amy Yasbeck, the other female lead. Despite these positives, The Mask tries very hard to be a throwback film. The Mask character is seen wearing a zoot suit like Cab Calloway and singing Cuban Pete popularized by Desi Arnaz. But try as it might, The Mask was a failed attempt at a tribute to a noir film. Who Framed Roger Rabbit was an actual tribute to noir films, was a much better film. The Mask needs a major rewrite to make the story cohesive and enjoyable. The acting in this film is not that great. Jim Carrey showed no growth in his acting skills with this film. He performed the same face, making immature antics he showed in the Ace Ventura movies and in Dumb and Dumber. But because this film was actually part cartoon, critics gave him a pass. Part of the problem is Carrey plays a loud, obnoxious, not very likable character, and the rest of the time, he's playing a simpering simpleton. The real growth for Carrey as an actor came when he started appearing in movies like The Truman Show or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where the comedy was more subtle, or there was no comedy at all, where Carrey played a victim of circumstance and had to draw on acting skills that he had not shown before, essentially playing a straight man with no clownish behavior to bail him out. Cameron Diaz is mere eye candy, as well as a love interest for Carrey's character in this film. She was much funnier in There's Something About Mary. And no, she did not sing in The Mask. Her singing voice was dubbed. Ben Stein appears in a few scenes as his usual bookish professorial type. 1994 was a good year for Jim Carrey, with hits like Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, and this live-action cartoon. And with his elastic facial expressions, he was of course very suitable for The Mask. I myself was more familiar with the cartoon series that appeared a year after this film. That series was with Rob Paulsen as Stanley Ipkiss, The Mask. In this film, Carrey plays the nerd Ipkiss, although you can see that he can hardly hold back. Even as Ipkiss, he already pulls some weird faces, which we are used to from him. But that's nothing compared to what he does when he puts on the mask. Then he goes, just like the movie, completely loose. The Mask 1994, From Ipkiss to The Mask. The first half hour of The Mask is all about Stanley and his uncertainty. The bank employee is easily fooled by his colleagues. A night out runs into a fiasco if he does not dare to stand up for himself, and even helping the beautiful Tina, Cameron Diaz, to open her bank account is almost impossible task. The missteps are cheesy, but they're so 90s. But that changes when one evening he finds a mysterious mask. The mask transforms Stanley into a hilarious character who knows no boundaries and has special powers. These powers are not much inferior to those of a fictional cartoon character, and no one can play a cartoony character better than Jim Carrey. However, Stanley uses his newly acquired powers not to fight crime, but to take revenge on his boss, to teach the crooks at the local garage a lesson, and to impress the beautiful Tina. But soon the fun is short-lived when he gets himself into trouble with the dangerous criminal and Tina's boyfriend Dorian, Peter Greene. 90s comedy at its best. The Mask is a wonderful comedy with a lot of humor. It's mainly the slapstick moments that provide the fun, but also the romantic undertone is very nice. It makes the movie lighthearted, while the special and visual effects are very cool. A nice example is the transformation of Stanley's Jack Russell Milo when the dog accidentally pushes his head into the mask. And Jim Carrey is the perfect choice to play this role. The comedian does great in his double role as the gentle Stanley and the exuberant character The Mask. The 90s vibe can be felt throughout the film, and certainly with Jim Carrey as the protagonist in his golden years. If ever a reboot was made for this, I reckon they should keep the 90s feeling. It totally fits the character. Hate him or love him. I can always appreciate him, whether in a more serious role like The Truman Show or in the more cartoon-like humor we get here in The Mask. Carrey is cut out for the role of the extravagant character. Conclusion: The Mask is a film you shouldn't take too seriously, even though some morality is tapped into. Be yourself, embrace your identity, etc. This film does exactly what you can expect from it: a smooth and humorous movie night. You know how, whenever you're looking for something in a group of similar things, which should include what you're looking for, chances are about 80 to 1 that you're not going to find it. It's Murphy's Law. The bookstore has the series you're looking for, but never the entry in it you want to buy. If you walk into an ice cream parlor with a craving for double fudge brownie, guess what the one flavor is that they're out of? It never fails. Similarly, during the years when I was merely a casual reader of MRFH, there were certain films that I felt certain should have been reviewed already, yet somehow weren't. Several of those holes have since been filled, mind you, but one of the ones that has remained empty up till now was the hole where The Mask should have been. Well, no more. I'm a reviewer here now, Goldernit, and I can review just about any movie I darn well please. And right now, I please to review this one. So yeah, it's whole fill-in time. The Mask, ladies and gentlemen. The story is set in a fictional metropolis known as Edge City, a rundown, polluted sort of place where dwelleth one Stanley Ipkiss, Jim Carrey. Stanley's a pretty nice guy, and as such, the universe has decreed in its infinite wisdom that his life shall suck. He's got a dead-end job at a bank, his boss yells at him, his landlady picks on him, and he can't get a date to save his life. He's the kind of guy who isn't a loser, exactly, but who never seems to win. And it doesn't look like things are going to change for him anytime soon. Looks can be deceiving, though. After a particularly humiliating non-starter of an evening, which is honestly rather painful to watch, he happens to be in the right place at the right time and acquires through random happenstance an old wooden mask. It's not much in the way of compensation for the night he's had, and he heads back home, feeling that life has flipped him the bird yet again. Little does he know, though, that this is not just any mask. No, this is a magic mask, with ties to Norse mythology. It's been chained up at the bottom of the harbor for who knows how long, and it's just itching to make up for lost time. The moment Stanley puts it on, he is transformed into, in his own words, a love-crazy wild man, a green-faced human cartoon character who can do just about anything, and what he primarily wants to do is have some fun. Dubbed the Mask, for obvious reasons, by the media, Stanley's alter ego quickly runs afoul of both the mob and the law. The mob in the form of Dorian Tyrell, Peter Greene, a slick small-time operator who's looking to get out from under the shadow of Big Boss Nico, Orestes Matessina, by pulling a few jobs of his own. When the Mask ruins his plans, he swears vengeance on the funny man. That is, if he can get to said funny man before Latorre Kellaway, Peter Riegert, a cop who figures out pretty quickly that this chaos-causing clown is in fact Stanley Ipkiss, and who seeks to prove it. None of this is helped in the slightest by the fact that Stanley has finally found a girl who seems interested in him, one Tina Carlisle, Cameron Diaz. She's a drop-dead bombshell who is intrigued by our protagonist both in and out of the mask, and who happens to be Dorian's girlfriend. Oh, this does not bode well. Before I go any further in talking about The Mask, let me just say that, for me, it is one of the defining movies of the mid-90s. If nothing else, this is the flick that officially unleashed Jim Carrey upon the world, and for good or ill, it's a little difficult to imagine the topography of 90s Hollywood without him. More than that, though, the movie is one of those flicks that is so representative of the time when it was made that it actually affected the time when it was made. I've already mentioned the catchphrases and such, but it's more than that. There's just something about the film's overall mood and mindset that seems to codify the way we thought about things back then. I'm probably not doing a good job of explaining what I mean, but basically, if you want to get a hint of what the cultural mindset of the times was, I'd say The Mask is one of a handful of films that I would recommend you watch. Having said that, is it any good? Well, that's what we're here to find out now, isn't it? Normally, I'd talk about other things before getting around to the main character, but there's no way to escape it. You cannot talk about The Mask without first bringing up Jim Carrey's performance. I'm not the biggest fan of Mr. Carrey. He's been in some pretty dumb stuff in his time, but here he makes the movie. There is a reason why The Mask made Carrey's career, and why many consider it the definitive example of his work. The guy goes nuts in this. I've read more reviews than I can list that say something along the lines of, he hardly needs the special effects. I'm not sure I'd go that far. They get pretty good mileage out of them, but holy crap does the guy pull out all the stops for this one. The Mask is the sort of character who's so far over the top, he busts through the ceiling. Just about every line that comes out of his mouth is quote-worthy, and if I could quote the weird little noises he makes, I would, especially since you will try and imitate them after you see this movie. He's best described as, and this is actually addressed within the film to some degree, a sort of living incarnation of Tex Avery cartoons. Every single wild take ever made collected into one man. Now, this could come off as just a tad obnoxious, and at times it does. I could have done without that weird snorting laugh, for instance. You'll know what I mean when you hear it. But there's a good reason for that. The Mask is basically Stanley's repressed id come to life. He's the explosion of steam when the lid is suddenly yanked off the pressure cooker. While we're on his side because he fights the bad guys, he is not someone you'd want to be in a room with for very long, quite possibly because he might hurt you. The guy basically has no restraints and no limits, including those which govern basic human interaction. He's pretty much solely out to have some fun, and while he's certainly very funny himself, there are a few bits that hint at a side to him that is just a little bit disturbing. The scene in the park, for instance. Tell me that things might not have escalated to decidedly uncomfortable levels if they hadn't been interrupted when they were. For all the Mask's weapons-grade levels of wacky, however, he isn't the main character. That would be Stanley Ipkiss himself, who, and it is worth emphasizing this, is not the Mask. The Mask is merely a part of his inner self that's unleashed and concentrated. It's not him. In fact, and this is not emphasized on, say, the box cover, the Mask's presence is not only not a beneficial one, it nearly tears Stanley's life apart. Sure, the guy goes out and has the fun that Stanley would like to have, but then he goes bye-bye and leaves the poor slob to clean up the mess. He basically spends the whole movie stuck in a careful what you wish for scenario, and the only positive effect the damn mask has on him is that it forces him to be more assertive and take charge, something like the most complicated and illegal therapy session ever. Thankfully, we remain invested in all this because we like Stanley. Carrey does a good job playing him as just enough of an oddball that it makes perfect sense for the mask to come out of him, while still making him a likable, relatable guy. And relatable is a good word for him, because, to the filmmaker's credit, he doesn't suddenly turn into an action star when he has to go up against his tormentors. Sure, he gets some badass moments, but like most of us, he can't throw a punch to save his life, and if he tries to sneak past the bad guys, he's probably going to fail. But he muddles through anyway, with or without that garish green face covering on. The tagline may be from zero to hero, meaning, of course, the mask, but they've got it wrong. The mask isn't the hero of the movie. Stanley is. So okay. The mask and Stanley are fine. What about the rest of it? The rest of it is okay, too. I mean, nobody is going to be giving the mask an award for innovative storytelling anytime soon, but it's a fun little film, and that's all it's really trying to be. Whenever a film is based around a single character and performance, the bits without said performance are going to seem a little lackluster, but who cares? It's still a lot of fun, and some parts approach brilliance. The Cuban Pete sequence, for instance, is dementedly entertaining enough to be worth the price of admission on its own. In fact, I think the main reason I enjoy this movie as much as I do is that despite its billing, it's not really a comedy. It's marketed as one, and it can be very funny, but really only when the titular character is zipping around. For the rest of the running time, it's basically a straight-faced adventure story with an element of the fantastic, and I've always liked those sorts of combinations. My theory is that most genres, comedy, tragedy, what have you, are more effective when combined with one or two others, and The Mask would seem to bear that out. It should be addressed, though, that this is not, in point of fact, an original movie. It's based on a comic, which it is very different from, and which it has largely eclipsed in the public eye. Its fans have complained that the movie is essentially a neutered version of the original, which is much darker and at times verges on being a horror story, with lots of violence and blood. Having only read snippets of it myself, I can't comment, but I will say that going by what little I have read, The Mask stays more or less true to the overall spirit of the comic, if not the particulars. And anyway, if you want dark and bloody, there are plenty of other movies that will deliver in spades. I'll just enjoy my wackiness. Thank you very much. Rest of characters time. The most prominent member of the supporting cast is Cameron Diaz as Tina Carlisle, and she's actually rather an interesting character. In many ways, Tina is a classic bad girl type. I mean, as the movie starts out, she's more or less Dorian's gun mole, albeit without the gun. And while she crosses over to the side of the angels pretty quickly, she doesn't actually change very much. She's a seductive, forthright woman, a little on the trashy side as far as cultural stereotypes go, but still sympathetic all the way through. Really, her growing relationship with Stanley is a definite opposites attract sort of thing. Who knows what she had with Dorian once upon a time, but it's clearly faded now. And while at first, Mr. Ipkiss seems like just another mark, this quickly changes. While he sees the girl of his dreams, who is clearly out of his league, which is part of the impetus for him continuing to put on the mask, she sees a nice man who treats her as a fellow human being as opposed to a piece of arm candy. Sure, she's intrigued by his alter ego, who wouldn't be, but she's looking for a real man, not a cartoon character, and in Stanley, plain old regular Stanley, she finds one. This is a good thing for her, because I doubt she would have survived being in Dorian's clutches for much longer. Peter Greene plays him as one of the definitive low-life slimeballs of the 90s, a guy who thinks he's just too cool for words and is not afraid to lash out at anyone who either disagrees with this or gets in his way. Sure, you can sympathize with him a little bit, since he's basically just trying to escape from his boss's iron grip. But honestly, the guy is so incredibly sleazy that he is cruising for a bruising from the green fist of justice. And when, slight spoiler, he does wind up donning the mask, the results are somewhat scary and remind you of just how dark the source material could get. He may not be one of the more complex villains around, but he's certainly a memorable one and has earned a place on my personal second-tier favorites list. As for the rest, you've got Lieutenant Kellaway, played by Peter Riegert as a persistent and short-tempered thorn in Stanley's side, and who really is unusually intelligent and competent for a cop in this sort of movie. This is made up for by Doyle, Jim Doan, his dim-witted partner. Amy Yasbeck plays Peggy Brandt, a reporter who is looking into this whole mask business and is more than what she seems, while Richard Jenny plays Charlie, Stanley's coworker and only real friend. A good running gag is his increasing bewilderment as his normally socially invisible pal gets asked for specifically by a succession of beautiful women. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Milo, Stanley's faithful pet. According to the credits, the actual name of the pooch in question is Max, and I hope he lived to a ripe old age and got lots of doggy treats because he's a complete scene stealer here. Sure, he's cute as the dickens and all, but unlike some animal actors, this dog can act. You don't see him wagging his tail while growling or the like, and he's got a natural canine charisma that shines through. Also, having just reviewed The Adventures of Tintin, I'd swear that some of Snowy's sequences in that were modeled after Milo's. Watch the two back to back and tell me I'm wrong. Final thoughts? The Mask is not in the upper echelon of my movie favorites, but it's a good, solid film that I enjoy. It's got a good cast, a great villain, special effects that have held up surprisingly well over the years, considering that they're supposed to be cartoony, and, of course, the definitive Jim Carrey performance. It's got its weaknesses, sure, but it's a fun little flick, and frankly, I couldn't imagine the 90s without it. Go ahead and check it out, if you haven't already. There. The hole, she is filled. You're welcome. One might suspect that the changing of the mask from blackly comedic ultraviolence to Tex Avery-style wackiness was yet another example of image-conscious studio heads ordering changes. But in fact, exactly the reverse is true. New Line Cinema was quite intrigued by the psychotic original Mask, seeing him as the next Freddy Krueger. As such, director Chuck Russell was all set to depict him that way, but after reading through multiple drafts of the script, he realized that he simply could not figure out a way to make it work except comedically. Subsequently, he had to convince the skeptical studio heads that the new direction he had planned was worth following, which was a long, hard slog, until Jim Carrey's treatment of the character finally tipped the scales. You may have noticed that the toothy grin Carrey sports as the Mask is not in fact his own, instead being part of the makeup. I say may have, because I only just noticed this myself, something that does not reflect particularly well upon my intelligence. I mean, look at those choppers. It was originally planned to only feature in silent shots, as it was thought that it would impede Carrey's performance. However, he learned how to speak around the teeth, and they were kept in the general design. The titular mask changes quite a bit in the transition from the comic, as does its background. In the original, it's African, not much more is known than that, and made out of jade. In the movie, it's Scandinavian and wooden. The bit where Stanley's landlady asks if he knows what time it is, and he says, "Actually, no," is a callback to a cutscene where his watch is stolen by street thugs. This comes up again later as he encounters the same thugs as the Mask. The yellow zoot suit that the Mask wears at one point, and which everybody thinks of him wearing when they think of the film, is based on a real suit of Jim Carrey's from his stand-up comedy days. It was made by his mother as something for him to wear on stage. The role and character of Stanley Ipkiss was changed somewhat for the film. In the original, he was a bitter, angry man who was quick to use the mask to wipe out everyone who had tormented him. Furthermore, he was only one of a long line of people to wear it, as it inevitably ruined its owners' lives and usually wound up killing them in the process. The mask's crack of, "Where's a camcorder when you need one?" is likely a reference to the Rodney King beating. Most of Stanley's whirlwind-like transformations into the Mask take place in his apartment, where a couch cushion featuring the likeness of the Tasmanian devil, who spins around in much the same way, is prominently featured. While the original comic is called The Mask, this is a reference to the mask itself as opposed to its wearer. Instead, the various people who wear it are collectively termed Big Head by the media, and thought by the general public to all be the same person. I said, "Look, Jim, they won't let us shut down if we don't get this. We don't get this." We dragged him out of the trailer, and he was a trooper and got it in there, delivered, and was fantastic. But those are the sort of things that would not have happened when Jim became the superstar that he became. 15, Russell had wanted Anna Nicole Smith as Tina, but she had gone to do Naked Gun 3313, The Final Insult, instead a costume. Director he had worked with had been recommending Cameron Dass, and they got her to audition for the part 15. The character was originally written as a good girl who is actually bad, but after Das was cast, the part was rewritten to make her genuinely a good person. 15, Mike Richardson said to Forbes that Das was great on making the movie. If you watch the film again, you'll notice scenes where Jim and Cameron are together. If you watch her face, oftentimes, Jim was doing something, and she would break out laughing the minute the scene ended. 15, visual effects. The MK Masks visual effects were handled by Industrial Light and Magic Ilum and DreamQuest Images. The sequences in the film, which involve computer animation, were supervised by Ilum animation director Wes Takahashi. 16. Although many VFX scenes had to be cut for budget 12, New Line invested more heavily on the special effects. As Jim, Carrey was not yet an established star. Russell videotaped the rehearsals then, worked to design the effects out of Carr's performance. I insisted on working off Jim's face on making the action organic to Jim's performance, no matter how good the effect is. If it's not coming out of character and story, it's not going to be effective. The guys at Elm said they figured I saved about $1 million once I got Jim, just on what he was able to do versus what we had intended to do. Originally, 17 makeup effects artist Greg Cannon wanted to bring out Carr's exaggerated facial expressions through makeup. Carr's daily makeup sessions took 4 hours. 19. The hat costume included fake teeth meant to be used outside of dialogue scenes. But Carrey learned to wear them while talking to play the character more convincingly. Oni Music, Swing Music, featured prominently in the film, and Royal Crown Review made an on-screen cameo, which in turn influenced the swing. Revival later in the decade. 21, The Mask music from the New Line, Cinema Motion. Picture was released on July 26, 1994, on Chaos Records through Sony Music. Entertainment. It features music from Escape Tony T, Vanessa Williams, Harry Casey K. Jr., Carrey himself, and more. The songs Cub and Pete and Hey Puko were also used for the trailer of the 1997 Disney film Flubber. Box office. The film was a box office success, grossing $119 million domestically and overdue $350 million worldwide, becoming the second highest grossing superhero movie at that time behind Batman. In terms of global grow, compared to budget, the film became the most profitable comic book movie of all time and remains so. Until 2019, when Joker surpassed at 24. The Mask is one of 3 films featuring Carrey, the others being Ace Ventura: Pet Detective and Dumb and Dumber, released in 1994, that helped launch the actor to superstardom. The Mask was the most successful of these 3 films, both critically and commercially. Critical response. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 80% based on reviews from 54 critics, with an average rating of 65/10. The site's consensus states it misses perhaps as often as it hits. But Jim Carrey's manic bombast, Cameron Diaz's blowsy appeal, and the film's overall cartoony bombast keep The Mask afloat. 25 Metacritic gave it a weighted average score of 56 out of 100 based on reviews from 12 critics. 26 audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A+ to F scale. 27. On the television program At the Movies, Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert gave the film 2 thumbs up. Citation needed in his column. Ebert, who was underwhelmed by his performance in Ace Ventura, thought Carrey found a perfect vehicle in The Mask. He also praised the art design and praised Carr's performance in The Mask by stating that he was better used as an ingredient instead of as the plot. He also commended Dass's performance, and he overall called the film the latest example of technique overriding the written word in an American film. 28. Accolades. The film was nominated for Best Visual Effects at the 67th Academy Awards. 29. The film was also nominated for Best Fantasy Film, Best Costumes, and Best Makeup at the Saturn Awards. Carrey was nominated for a Golden Globe, but also a Razzie Award for Worst New Star Home Media. The film was released on VHS and Laserdisc on January 18, 1995, and on DVD on March 26. 1997, the HS version included the Space Ghost Coast to Coast episode The Mask, which features interviews with Jim Carrey and Chuck Russell. It was later released on Blu-ray disc on December 9, 2033. It was the most rented title in the UK for the year, with 38 million rentals. Animated series, an animated television series titled The Mask Animated Series, made over 54 episodes from 1995 to 1997, with Rob Paulsen as Stanley Ipis and his alter ego The Mask, and Neil Ross as Kelway. Ben Stein reprised his role as Dr. Newman, though, based on the film, and making some minor references to its events. It is set in an alternate continuity where Ipis kept the mask, Tina Carrey is absent, and the mask works. During daytime, its final episode was a crossover with another Jim Carrey character, Ace Ventura. This would later continue in an episode of the Ace Ventura Pet Detective cartoon series. Sequel after the success of the original. A sequel film was planned with magazine Nintendo Power offering readers a chance via sweepstakes to win a cameo role in hand. The film 35 Carrey eventually bailed on the project, forcing Nintendo Power to give the winner of the contest the equivalent cash value of the cameo role. Instead, 36, a standalone sequel, Son of The Mask, featuring neither Carrey nor Dee, was eventually released in 2005, but it was a critical and commercial failure upon release, and the franchise was put on hold indefinitely on the possibility of a direct sequel to the 1994 film, with Carrey reprising the role of Stanley I.U.S. and Das as Tina Carlisle. Mike Richardson said in a 2014 interview, "We've been talking about reviving The Mask, both in film and in comics. We've had a couple of false starts. The Mask movie review. The open shots of The Mask look like they were salvaged from a desperately low-budget 1950s science fiction movie. Marine salvage operations lead to the rupture of ancient chest that has rested for ages on the bottom of the bay, and a curious wooden mask floats to the surface not long after disconsolate bank teller Stanley Ipis, a genial nerd played by Jim Carrey, is staring into the dark waters and contemplating suicide. He has just been bounced from a nightclub, the latest in a long series of humiliations, but he has a good heart, and when he sees the mask floating with some rubbish, he thinks it is a drowning victim and jumps in to save it." Transformation scenes are, of course, the soul of comic book fiction. Billy Batson shouts Shazam, Clark Kent darts into a phone booth, Bruce Wayne becomes Batman, and in every case, an insignificant wimp becomes a superhero. No wonder adolescent boys respond to these stories so powerfully. Consider what happens to Stanley when he puts on the mask. He is instantly transformed into a maniacal whirlwind of energy, dressed in a 1940s style zoot suit, a cross between the Joker and Aladdin's genie, with elements of the Gat. Shadow the Mask is a perfect vehicle for the talents of Jim Carrey, who underwhelmed me with Ace Ventura Pet Detective, but here seems to have found a story and character that work together with manic energy. One of the key design decisions on the movie, must-have, involved the mask character's makeup. It transforms Carr's features into a much larger comic bookish parody, but at the same time, the features are still able to move in a lifelike way. The notes with the film explained that makeup expert Greg Kenham realized Carr's exaggerated facial expressions are part of his essence and didn't want them lost behind makeup. The result is a movie character who seems half real, half animated, and the director Charles Russell is able to use special effects to move effortlessly between what might be possible and what is certainly not. The mask whirls like a boop dervish and triumphantly prevails in situations that would have baffled poor Stanley Ipis. The story begins with Stanley as a hapless bank clerk who is hopelessly beset by a beautiful customer, Tina Carlisle Cameron Das. She flirts with him in the bank while taking secret videotape of the vault for her boss, the slimy Dorian Tyrell, Peter Greene, who runs the Cocoa Bow Bongo Club, where of course Tina is the Slinky Chantu. Cameron Das is a true discovery in the film, a genuine sex bomb with a gorgeous face, a wonderful smile, and a gift of comic timing. This is her first movie role after a brief modeling career. It will not be her last. Her chemistry with the Carr character holds together a plot that is every bit as derivative as it can be, and when she dances with the mask, the result is one of those scenes when movie magic really works. The story otherwise involves Richard Jenny as Charlie Stanley's best friend at the bank, who introduces him to the mysteries of the Coco Bongo Club. Peter Rear as a cop who notices the mask's tie seems to be made of the same material as Stanley's unspeakable pajamas, and Milo Stanley's dog, who is at least as clever as his master the art. Design on the movie goes for the lurid 1940s film noir look of a lot of superhero comic books, and the Coco Bongo Club looks recycled out of Gilda and a dozen other movies with elegant many nightclubs. Stanley's apartment resembles a teenage boy's bedroom. All that's missing is a sign on the outside of the door saying, "Keep out. This means you." The look of the film is as much fun as anything else. I was not one of the admirers of Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. Millions were. However, I thought the story surpassed stupidity, and not in interesting ways, but I could sense some of Carr's unrestrained energy and gift for comic invention. And here where the story and the decor and the idea of the mask provide an anchor for his energy, Carrey demonstrates that he does have a genuine gift. It is said that one of the indispensable qualities of an actor is an ability to communicate the joy he takes in his performance, you could say. The Mask was founded on that. The Mask was ahead of its time in many ways. It was, of course, at the height of Jim Carr's comedic Purple Patch. But there is more to it than that. It utilized decent CGI. For the early 90s was a comic book movie. Before those were huge and could even arguably be a superhero movie of sorts. It's also the perfect J.Y. Carrey vehicle. Once Carrey is the Mask, he is allowed to unload and make use of rubber-faced talents. He throws everything at the screen, from pop culture references through to classic cartoon character parodies. There are amazing scenes, too, from an incredible dancing number featuring a very young Cameron Dass through to a great showdown with a host of cops, which manages to end in its own dance number. There is also some inventive moments when other characters get hold of the titular mask. This works particularly effectively when the villain of the story gets hold of the powers and makes the finale a much more appealing and very cool moment. Peter Greene is a decent villain, although this is Carr's picture, and everything else manages to support his efforts. It isn't. Just when Carrey is the Mask, either the movie manages to show the softer, calmer side to the Hollywood nugget star when he isn't the Mask. It helps you get on board with Stanley Ipus, making his transformation mean so much more, and also highlights some fantastic scenes which can be as funny as anything when Carrey is wearing the mask, as original and funny as this movie is. Though it doesn't hide the fact that there is little of substance here. The story is very basic and very silly in places. The plot is poor and doesn't quite hold up enough to make this a classic Carrey Sparkles, but the film hasn't aged well, and his movies since have shown that he is better than this material allows him to be, even if he is allowed to let loose and show some of his more classic talents. Other information about this film: Lean, Mean, and Green the Mask is unquestionably a money-making movie machine, but there's nothing mechanical or rote about the offbeat, romantic adventure. This showcase for the talents of Jim Carrey is dryly directed, viscerally, and visually dynamic, and just plain fun. The box office will be booming, just like the title character's heart, and the film should easily emerge as one of the year's biggest commercial successes. The comic book refugee arrives, with a nod to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the fictional burg of Edge City. Good-hearted Stanley Ipus Carrey works doggedly as a loan officer at a major bank. He's a very nice guy and true to the old saw has wound up at the appropriate lower rung of the ladder. Then comes that fateful night. While his buddy and a couple of babes glide into the exclusive Coco Bongo Club, Stan gets the proverbial heave-ho driving back to his apartment. The dejected sap spies what he thinks is a body floating in the river. He dives into the polluted waters, only to discover a carved face mask attached to a mass of fleton. But when he returns home and tries on the relic, the fit is frightening, drab, mild-mannered. Stanley morphs into a confident whirlwind of color, with a grin on his green face revealing a set of pearly whites that's blinding in his new Guy's the Mask. He definitely provides the edge in Edge City, though there's little doubt where the tale is headed. Mike Werb's script, in Charles Russell's direction, effectively managed to mask obvious intentions with crisp, witty banter and visual bravura. The usual pitfall of the drab guy providing long, colorless narrative is cleverly stepped by. Means of colorful supporting characters carries innate charisma, and a truly extraordinary dog named Max as Ray, Stanley's intrepid, industrious, and perplexed pet Milo. Meanwhile, the dazzling special effects come as close as humanly possible to replicating the mayhem and invention of 40s Warner Bros. Cartoons. The title character literally bounces off walls, and when he spies his dream girl, his jaw puts a dent in the floorboards because Stanley is such a nice, albeit uptight guy. He can only daydream about knockout Tina Carlisle. Cameron, the mask is another matter. Nothing is going to stop him from romancing her and dancing up a storm in one of the film's inventive bits of pyrotechnic choreography. The glitch is that Tina is the mall of gangster Dorian Tyrell, Peter Greene, so somewhat inadvertently the green-complected mask winds up putting a monkey wrench in Tyrell's power-hungry plans. In addition, L.T. Kelway Peter Riegert of the EP is in pursuit, convinced the mask is the criminal mastermind behind the city's current spate of lawlessness. It's inconceivable to imagine anyone but the dexterous Carrey as the mask in the film sports a uniformly strong support cast, with very good villains, including Greene and Oars, Medusa, and a droll good cop. Turn from Rear DA is a real find as the femme fatale who's just looking for the decent thing to do, applying a deft touch, Russell, hither to a genre director, maintains a cartoon style to the violence that's quite suitable for all audiences at the same time. P has a hip sensibility that will attract young adults as well as older ones for a late summer deluge. It may only be coincidence that the green-skinned character sports a yellow-gold suit and fedora in the commercial academy. The mask's colors are definitely green and gold. What you need to know: a timid bank clerk releases all his repressed inhibitions when an ancient mask brings out a supernatural cartoon like Alter Ego, emerging only when he wears the mask. This otherwise surprisingly enjoyable worldview in which aggressive nature is necessary for problem solving, in 14 obscenities, 5 profanities, exclamatory, and numerous vulgarities and sexual innuendos, shootouts, and gunfire fist. 140-29. Fights, car chases, and slapstick violence. None gory, no sex, but 2 prolonged kisses. No nudity, but 1 female character wears revealing clothing. Brief occultism. 1. Reference to ancient mask as representative of Norwegian night god of mischief Loki, and robbery and theft, by main character who uses cash for partying and dog urinates on man more. Detail: a timid bank clerk releases all his inhibitions when an ancient mask summons a supernatural cartoon like Alter Ego, emerging only when he wears the mask. Jim Carrey stars in the bod. Dark Horse Comics fantasy as terminal nice guy Stanley Ipus, constantly down on his luck and always finishing last until he finds a strang-looking mask floating in the River Edge city. Never be the same. Once Stanley slips on the mask, only to be consumed in a tornado like Whirlwind and emerge as a green-faced, zoot-suited wild man with the biggest set of caps this side of W. B. Goldberg. Dazzling special effects by George Lucas Academy. Award-winning industrial light and magic bring the mask to life, while star Jim Carrey's on-screen canine sidekick Max deserves an Oscar. Carrey is the real. Surprise Car's normal eshtick is perverse, obnoxious, and disgusting. But in The Mask, his wacky style under control with director Chuck Russell is a perfect fit. This otherwise surprisingly enjoyable movie's message falls short, teaching that nice guys finish last, unless they can muster up a wildly aggressive dark side, able to overcome adversity and stand up for number one, with a slight change in the resolution. This would have been a more acceptable movie. As it is in slick and entertaining horny boy movie, as they say, in Hollyweird background of the film in 1994. Charles Russell released The Mask based on the comic book series of the same name by John R. Q. and Doug Mann, starring Jim Carrey. Cameron Dass, Peter Greene, Richard Jenny, Peter Rard, Jim Doan, Amy Yasbeck Orr, Medusa I'm on Nancy Fish, and Ben Stein. The film grossed over $3.516 million at the box office. Synopsis: banker Stanley Ipus finds a magical mask endowed with the powers of Loki, making the wearer immune to everything, incapable of anything. He uses it to get back at bullies and woo a nightclub singer. But there are others who seek its powers. The Mask is a good and enjoyable film from start to finish, presenting audiences with Ipus, a spineless banker with no life other than going home to his dog and watching classic Tech Avery cartoons. he eventually finds a mask floating around a bridge and embarks on a wild ride as the mask, a cartoonish, being able to bend reality to his will. The stunts he pulls while fighting warring factions of the city's mafia, along with the police, are humorous and fun to watch, with audiences guessing just what the mask is going to do next. At the same time, the ensuing romance between Ipus and Tina Karila, initiated by the mask, is interesting, considering she's the main squeeze of the film's antagonist Dorian. It is a fascinating aspect of the film in its treatment of Ipus and the mask as two separate characters he's treated poorly by nearly every character other than his closest friends. Yet he goes through good character development as he takes cues from his alter ego, learning to stand up for himself. As the film goes on, Ipus is even immediately characterized as a lonely heart looking for love in a big city. As seen when newspaper reporter Peggy Branch runs into him at his bank, his lack of courage is even shown early on when failing to stand up to his landlord, who decides to tell a dripping wet Ipus the money to restore her new carpet is coming out of his security deposit. The mask is essentially a foil for Ipus, where the latter would be unable to make the first move in wooing a woman. The mask will interrupt a singer's set to change the musician's attire, have them start playing in a completely different style, and engage in a tango with said singer. He won't let anyone get the upper hand on him either. Seen in his first few minutes, the mask jumps out of a window and is confronted by a car. The driver lays on the horn, causing the titular character to produce a tiny horn with a sound able to blow the car's windows out. Thugs attempting to jump him in the very next moment are also chased away thanks to his antics, where Ipus is meek, would rather not stir up any trouble and content with slinking away when confrontation happens. The mask is bold, produces trouble, and is at the center of any confrontation. This film, directed by Chuck Russell, screenplay by Mike W. Story by Michael Fallon, Mark Ben, based on The Mask by Dark Horse Comics, produced by Bob Engelman, starring Jim Carrey, Peter Rard, Peter Greene, Amy Yasbeck, Richard Jenny, Cameron Dass. Cinematography, John R. Leonetti, edited by Arthur Coburn, music by Randy Edelman. Production company, KJ Motion Picture Corporation, distributed by New Line. Cinema release date, July 29, 1994. Running time, 101 minutes. Country United. States language English. Budget due $182.23 million. Box office $516 million. So guys, this is the review of The Mask movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't